Emma Caldwell was the grieving wife everyone admired. Tears on the news, missing posters in hand, leading search parties for her beloved husband, David. But as detectives unraveled the truth, a chilling question emerged. Had the woman pleading for help already buried the man she claimed to love? David Caldwell disappeared on a gray Thursday that began like any other. The skies were overcast, heavy with the kind of clouds that made the small town of Alder Creek feel even more isolated than it already was. He left home at 7:15 a.m., waved goodbye to his wife Emma on the porch, and drove off in his silver Honda Accord. According to his co-workers at Alder Creek High, he taught his morning classes like always, calm, prepared, and smiling in that quiet way he was known for. By noon, however, David seemed distracted. A colleague noticed him lingering in the staff parking lot during lunch, staring at something on his phone, brows furrowed. He didn't say much the rest of the day. He left work at 3:30 p.m. sharp and was never seen again. The first real clue came from a park ranger just outside town. Around 6 p.m. he noticed an empty car parked awkwardly near the entrance of Black Ridge Trail, a remote and rugged hiking path. The area wasn't closed, but locals knew to avoid it near dusk. It was steep, muddy, and easy to get lost in. The ranger found the car odd but didn't investigate further that night. It was only the next morning when the same vehicle sat unmoved in the same spot that he reported it. The license plate matched David Caldwell's registration. Police arrived by 9 a.m., and what they found only deepened the mystery. David's phone was still in the car, placed neatly in the center console. His wallet remained untouched, still containing his ID, cash, and credit cards. In the back seat, a brown paper bag held a sandwich, an apple, and a thermos of coffee, all untouched. The driver's seat was pushed back, suggesting David hadn't left in a hurry. The doors were unlocked, the windows rolled up. No signs of forced entry, no blood, no footprints leading into the woods, just a perfectly parked car and a strange growing silence. By 10 a.m., Emma Caldwell had already filed a missing person report. She told police her husband always came straight home after work, never went hiking alone, and never ignored her calls. Her concern was palpable. She trembled as she described their last morning together, holding back tears. She said David had been quiet lately, but she assumed he was just tired from work. He kissed me goodbye, she said softly. Everything seemed normal. Within hours, Emma sprang into action. She printed flyers with David's photo. His kind smile, short brown hair, and rectangular glasses made him instantly recognizable. She posted them on telephone poles, coffee shop windows, and convenience store doors. She handed them out at gas stations, grocery stores, and news stations picked up the story almost immediately. A beloved teacher vanishing without a trace was enough to grip the entire town. Search parties were formed the same day. Dozens of volunteers, flashlights in hand, combed the Black Ridge Trail for any sign of David. They called his name until their voices went hoarse. Some carried whistles, others brought dogs. Emma walked with them, clutching a flashlight and crying softly. The image of her, small, pale, and visibly shaken, became a symbol of the chaos. Reporters followed her movements, capturing every anguished expression for the evening news. But behind all the activity, something didn't sit right with Detective Laura Briggs, the lead investigator assigned to the case. She had seen hundreds of missing persons reports in her 22-year career, and something about this one felt too neat, too well-timed. Emma's answers were emotionally charged but oddly consistent, as if rehearsed. Her grief was convincing, yet there was no crack, no slip, no moment of confusion. For a woman whose husband may have vanished in the woods or worse, her story never wavered. And so the question remained. Where was David Caldwell? Had he wandered into the forest and lost his way? Had something more sinister happened on that quiet, overcast Thursday? The deeper detectives looked, the more it felt like this wasn't a simple disappearance. It was the beginning of something far darker, something carefully planned, precisely executed, and disturbingly quiet. To those who knew them, David and Emma Caldwell were the kind of couple that didn't just seem happy, they radiated stability. They were quiet people, but in a comforting way, reserved, polite, and always together. They had lived in Alder Creek for nearly 7 years, settling into a modest two-story house on a quiet street, bordered by thick trees and clipped lawns. Neighbors remembered their house-warming barbecue, the way David grilled burgers while Emma handed out lemonade with a smile that never faded. There were no children, but no one thought twice about it. They had often said they were content, just the two of them. David was a high school history teacher who inspired loyalty in his students. He had that rare ability to make the past come alive without raising his voice. Calm, deliberate, and fiercely dedicated, he was the kind of teacher students came back to visit years later. His classroom was decorated with Civil War maps and vintage globes. His lectures were quiet but absorbing. He stayed late to help struggling students, and he never missed a day of work. Emma worked part-time at a local bookstore, the kind that still smelled like paper and coffee. She ran the Saturday morning reading group for children, organized local author events, and baked muffins for fundraisers. Everyone in town knew Emma. People trusted her. She volunteered at the animal shelter on Sundays and dropped off soup to sick neighbors. She remembered birthdays, sent thank you cards, and always seemed to have time for one more good deed. If anyone asked about her marriage, she'd tilt her head and say, "David, he's my best friend." But the perfect picture they painted began to look strange under the scrutiny of David's disappearance. The more detectives spoke to friends and acquaintances, the more inconsistency emerged, not in facts but in feeling. One neighbor recalled an argument overheard through open windows one summer night. It wasn't loud, but it was tense, with David's voice low and strained. Another remembered how David had started jogging alone late in the evenings, something he never did before. When asked why, he just smiled and said he needed space to clear his head. Others noticed David had become quieter in the past 2 months, not withdrawn exactly, but distant. He stopped staying after school as often. He canceled his usual poker night with colleagues. He no longer brought lunch from home but instead picked up takeout. Odd, considering Emma was known for packing his meals meticulously. When asked about Emma, David would still smile, but the smile never quite reached his eyes. Emma, meanwhile, remained composed. She gave interviews filled with emotion and detailed timelines of David's routines. Her grief seemed raw, but her presence was always controlled. She appeared everywhere, leading searches, holding prayer vigils, thanking volunteers with handwritten notes. Yet no one could recall seeing her truly break down, not once. It was as if she were performing a role she had studied closely, every gesture precise, every tear perfectly timed. Detective Laura Briggs took note of this. It wasn't that Emma acted guilty, it was that she acted too polished. Laura had seen true grief, the kind that shattered speech, blurred memory, and bent time. Emma didn't falter, even in the moments when she was alone and unobserved. At least, when she thought no one was watching, she moved with eerie purpose, as if every step, every word, every tear was part of a long-rehearsed script. The town clung to the image of the happy couple, unwilling to believe anything darker could be lurking behind closed doors. But Laura had seen it too often before. The most serene households sometimes hid the deepest fractures. What secrets could be buried beneath the quiet smiles and birthday cards? And more urgently, was David hiding something before he vanished, or was Emma? The illusion of perfection began to crumble, not with a crash, but with soft, steady cracks, and with each one, suspicion crept in where trust used to live. Detective Laura Briggs was not easily unsettled. In her 20-plus years on the force, she had worked homicides that left entire towns shaken. She'd seen desperation, grief, and cold calculation, and she had developed a skill for picking out what didn't belong, the stray thread that unraveled the whole story. From the beginning, something about David Caldwell's disappearance nagged at her. It wasn't the lack of a body or the quiet, eerie location of his abandoned car. It was the atmosphere around the case, the strange neatness of it all, as if the chaos had been carefully curated. She began her investigation at the Caldwell home. From the outside, the house was a picture of middle-class calm, a blue door, trimmed hedges, wind chimes that moved gently in the breeze. But inside, Laura noticed a stillness that went beyond grief. The house was too tidy, too steady. The furniture was perfectly arranged, no coffee cup left in the sink, no laundry basket out of place. Even the garbage was taken out. It looked less like a home in crisis, and more like a home waiting for someone to come and examine it. Laura walked the room slowly. The bedroom was made up, the sheets crisp. On David's nightstand was a small stack of books, a reading lamp, and an unopened anniversary card, still sealed, edges slightly worn, as if it had been picked up and put down more than once. She found that curious. Emma had mentioned their anniversary had just passed, but she hadn't brought up the card. Why hadn't it been opened? When asked, Emma hesitated, then shrugged and said David must have forgotten. But the unopened card wasn't from David, it was to him, from her. The next red flag came from David's phone records. Though his phone had been left in his car, forensic analysis showed that several calls and texts had been deleted in the days before he vanished. Not just casual messages, but entire threads wiped clean. The deletions were recent, likely done manually, and while most of David's contacts checked out, one number stood out, unlisted, untraceable, and contacted several times in the week leading up to his disappearance. Laura couldn't identify the recipient, but something about it told her David had been reaching for help, or maybe answers. Security cameras in the area didn't offer much, but one piece of footage stood out. A camera mounted outside a local gas station caught Emma's car at 1:48 a.m., the night before David vanished. She had told police she'd been home all night, unable to sleep from worry over David's recent behavior. But the footage showed her driving alone, face pale in the dim light, her expression unreadable. Where had she gone in the middle of the night, and why lie about it? Emma's behavior also raised more subtle alarms. She cooperated fully, always answering questions without hesitation. But Laura noticed she never asked for updates. Most spouses in a missing persons case checked in obsessively, hourly even. Emma never did. She spoke of David in the past tense sometimes, then quickly corrected herself. She organized search efforts, yes, but she always delegated, never took the lead. It was as if she wanted to appear involved, but never risked being too close to the real investigation. Laura's instincts told her this case wouldn't unfold the way people hoped. She kept circling back to that car. Why hadn't David opened it? Was he trying to distance himself emotionally from Emma, or did he already know something he couldn't face? There was a tension in the air at the Caldwell home, like a room recently vacated by an argument. Laura couldn't yet prove anything, but the clues were whispering the same truth. David hadn't simply walked away from his life. He had been preparing for something, or running from it. And whatever it was, it began, and possibly ended inside the walls of his perfect-looking home. The search for David Caldwell intensified as the days passed. Volunteers came and went, reporters circled like vultures, and still there was no trace of the missing teacher. The quiet woods of Black Ridge Trail had been scoured repeatedly by trained dogs and drones. No clothing, no phone activity, no bank transactions. It was as if David had been erased from the world without a sound. But just as the case threatened to go cold, a neighbor unknowingly cracked it open. Tyler Reese lived 2 houses down from the Caldwell. A local mechanic with a cluttered front yard and a gruff personality, he wasn't one to get involved in other people's business. But during a casual conversation with a patrol officer checking the area again, Tyler casually mentioned something odd. A few nights before David disappeared, he had seen Emma out behind her house around midnight. She was burning something in a metal drum, hidden from the street view by the fence. He assumed it was just yard debris. But now, with the flyers still hanging on poles and search teams still marching into the woods, the memory took on a different weight. Detective Laura Briggs followed up that same afternoon. Tyler wasn't sure of the exact night, but he was certain it was late and definitely unusual. Emma had never used that burn barrel before, not in all the years he'd lived there. She had been alone, moving quietly, and stayed outside for a long time, even after the fire had mostly died out. Laura immediately ordered a forensic sweep of the backyard. What they found changed the direction of the entire investigation. Behind the shed, partially hidden beneath a fresh layer of garden mulch, a faint but unmistakable scent caught the attention of the K9 unit. Digging began. They didn't find a body, not yet, but beneath the topsoil and carefully arranged flower pots, investigators unearthed fragments of charred fabric, scorched paper, and most disturbingly, a small trace of dried blood in the soil. It wasn't visible to the naked eye, but a luminol test confirmed it. Samples were rushed to the lab. When the DNA came back 2 days later, it matched David Caldwell. The blood wasn't enough to confirm death, but it shattered the illusion that David had vanished voluntarily. Someone had tried to erase something back. Someone had gone to great lengths to clean up. Laura returned to Emma with more questions, but she remained calm, even helpful. She claimed not to know anything about a fire. "We sometimes burn old junk," she said casually. "David handled that. I haven't touched it in weeks." It was a lie, but one told with such confidence, it was easy to see how others might believe her, but not Laura. Digging deeper into the Caldwell property, investigators used ground-penetrating radar around the backyard and crawl space. Inconclusive readings beneath the shed sparked interest. The area had clearly been disturbed. When the boards of the shed floor were lifted, the stench hit first. Damp earth, mold, and something metallic and unmistakably wrong. What they uncovered was a shallow depression lined with plastic tarp and coated with quicklime. The space was empty, but the soil was saturated with organic residue. Forensics would later confirm it had once held a human body. Whatever had been buried there had been moved. Now the question wasn't just who had hurt David, but when and why had the body been removed. Laura considered the possibility that someone else had helped, but the planning, the cleanup, the misleading tears, it all pointed back to Emma, and now there was proof, buried beneath her carefully trimmed garden, that David had never left on a hike that afternoon. He had never left home at all. The deeper Detective Laura Briggs dug into David Caldwell's life, the more it began to feel like he had been silently unraveling the mystery of his own marriage long before the world knew he was missing. Something had changed in him in the months leading up to his disappearance, something invisible to most, but now glaringly obvious. It wasn't just the late-night jogs or the distant stares his colleagues recalled, it was the growing tension behind his every move, the quiet fear in his. He had been carrying a secret, one too heavy to share but too dangerous to ignore. A surprising lead came from a small private investigation firm 2 towns over. Laura had put out feelers, trying to trace any steps David might have taken on his own. She didn't expect much, but one call changed everything. A receptionist confirmed that David Caldwell had hired their services 6 weeks before he vanished. The request had come through email, using a private encrypted account that traced back to David. He had paid in cash. The message was brief but clear. "I need to know who I married. Something's not right." The investigator assigned to the case was semi-retired, a man named Harris Dunn. When Laura visited him, he pulled out a slim file marked. Inside were surveillance notes, database printouts, and several photos. It was all centered on Emma Caldwell, or rather the woman known as Emma Caldwell. Harris had been suspicious at first. After all, the woman had a clean record, a stable job, and was practically a model citizen. But as he peeled back the layers of her identity, strange anomalies appeared. Her social security number had been issued late years after she would have graduated high school. There were no school records, no medical files, no credit activity prior to a certain date. It was as if she had only begun to exist at 23. Before that, there was nothing. The truth was chilling. Emma Caldwell wasn't her real name. She had changed it legally, but only after moving across the country and severing every tie to her past. Her original name, carefully redacted in the final PI report, was linked to a sealed juvenile file in another state. Though the details remained hidden, there were suggestions of fraud, theft, and a suspected involvement in an arson case that had destroyed all evidence of a foster care facility's financial mismanagement. She had disappeared before any formal charges could be filed. The records were sealed, protected by her age at the time, but what was clear, even through the legal fog, was that Emma had a long history of manipulation and vanishing just before the truth caught up to her. David had received this report just 5 days before he vanished. A printed copy was recovered from his school desk, tucked inside a notebook beneath stacks of ungraded essays. Laura could only imagine his reaction. The woman he had trusted for nearly a decade, the person he had shared a life and a home with, was a stranger. She hadn't just lied about her past, she had erased it. The pieces began to fit together. David hadn't confronted Emma immediately. He was methodical, careful. He likely wanted to speak with her, to understand, maybe even to protect her, but he underestimated her. Emma, whose entire adult life had been a performance built on deception, would not allow anyone to unravel it, not even the man who loved her. Laura couldn't help but wonder if David had sensed the danger, if he'd known that the truth wouldn't just end his marriage, but end his life. He had moved quietly, trying to confirm his fears before making a decision, but someone had been watching, someone who had spent years perfecting the art of staying hidden, and when the truth finally came to light, Emma didn't run,
she buried it. The discovery of David Caldwell's blood behind the shed and the confirmation of Emma's false identity left no doubt in Detective Laura Briggs' mind. This wasn't a missing persons case anymore, it was a homicide, one buried under layers of deception and years of carefully maintained appearance. Still, without a body the case remained frustratingly incomplete, but the evidence was beginning to speak louder than Emma's calm explanations, and as Laura reconstructed the final days of David's life, the portrait of a cold and calculated plan began to emerge. Emma had always presented herself as the grieving wife, shattered, confused, desperate for answers, but in reality, she had been preparing, not just for David's death, but for the cover-up. Investigators uncovered receipts for gardening supplies, lime, tarp, gloves, purchased 2 days before David's disappearance. She claimed they were for a landscaping project, but no such project ever materialized. Laura believed that Emma hadn't just panicked when David confronted her about her past, she had anticipated it. The private investigator's report had been thorough. When David received it, he would have realized that his marriage had been built on a foundation of lies. He may have been willing to forgive Emma, to listen, to understand, but that didn't matter. Emma didn't want understanding, she wanted control, and David, knowing her truth, stripped that away from her. According to Emma's cell phone records, she made no calls the night David disappeared, no texts, no emails, but security footage showed her leaving the house after 10 p.m. hours after David had supposedly come home from work. Her car was seen turning off the main road and returning 40 minutes later. Police believed she had moved the body that night, possibly to an isolated area beyond Black Ridge Trail. The crawlspace had been her temporary solution, a cold, dark place beneath their home, where David's body had been kept for several hours, maybe longer. She had wrapped him in tarp, covered him with lime to mask decomposition, and concealed the area with tools and storage boxes. Later, when she realized how closely investigators were circling the house, she moved him. Where exactly remained unknown, but Laura suspected she had buried him somewhere deep in the woods, or possibly even burned what she could. The burn barrel, once dismissed as insignificant, had contained traces of synthetic fabric, scorched paper, and what looked like bone fragments, small and fractured. The analysis was ongoing, but preliminary results indicated they were human. Emma's plan had been precise. After the murder, she wiped down surfaces, deleted David's digital trail, and staged the car at the trailhead to throw off the investigation. She left his phone in the console, untouched, so it would look like he had gone hiking and simply vanished. Then, with chilling efficiency, she called the police, filed the missing person report, and began her public performance. She wept on camera, organized search teams, passed out flyers with his photo, her own husband's face, and pleaded for information. Every move was calculated to redirect suspicion, to make her look like a heartbroken wife, rather than a murderer, and it worked, at least for a while. Neighbors sympathized. The media painted her as a devoted spouse. Even law enforcement was initially caught in the illusion. But Laura saw through it. The lies weren't sloppy, but they were too polished, the grief too rehearsed, and now with each new discovery, Emma's carefully constructed world was collapsing. Her web of control was beginning to fray. The most haunting part of it all wasn't the brutality of the murder or the manipulation afterward, it was the silence, the fact that Emma had lived for days, possibly weeks, under the same roof, where she had killed and concealed her husband. She had slept in her bed, answered the door with a smile, and comforted others, all while knowing exactly what had happened to David. This wasn't a crime of passion, it was a decision, quiet, deliberate, final.
Emma Caldwell's arrest did not come with flashing lights or a dramatic chase. It happened quietly, during a community search meeting she had helped organize at the local church. Volunteers were gathered in the fellowship hall, sipping coffee and reviewing new maps of the surrounding forest. Emma stood at the front, poised, calm, her hands clasped as she thanked everyone for coming. The moment felt almost scripted, like the dozens of other times she had played the role of the worried wife. But this time, Detective Laura Briggs was in the room. 2 officers entered through the side door and approached without hesitation. When they reached Emma, she looked at them but didn't flinch. There was no panic, no surprise, only a brief pause, like someone catching their breath before a long dive. Laura stepped forward and read the charges: suspicion of murder, obstruction of justice, destruction of evidence. Emma offered no resistance as they handcuffed her in front of the entire room. She simply turned her head to the side, as if bored, and walked out with eerie composure. The town was stunned. In the hours following the arrest, social media exploded. Headlines declared wife of missing teacher charged with his murder. Reporters swarmed the police station, neighbors stood in clusters whispering disbelief, and the flyers with David's face still fluttered on telephone poles in the wind. How could the woman, who had cried on television, who had hugged mothers and led vigils, be the very person responsible? Back at the station, Emma sat alone in the interrogation room. She didn't ask for a lawyer, she didn't ask for water, she didn't ask anything at all. When Laura entered the room, Emma looked up and smiled faintly, as if greeting an old friend. It was the kind of smile that unsettled even Laura, who had long since learned not to react. Emma answered questions in vague terms, never confirming, never denying, always dancing around the truth like someone too clever to be caught off guard. But the evidence was no longer circumstantial. It was real, physical, damning. In addition to the DNA and the fabricated alibi, investigators had discovered Emma's search history on a hidden browser app she had installed on her phone. Phrases like "how to dissolve bone quickly," "how long does lime hide decomposition," and "how to make a disappearance look like an accident," had been entered days before David went missing. When confronted with the search history, Emma tilted her head and said, "Curiosity isn't a crime," but her smile faltered for just a moment. In the days that followed, prosecutors built a tight case. They presented the false identity, the sealed juvenile record, and the private investigator's report that David had received. They showed the receipts, the surveillance footage, the burn barrel evidence, and the blood-soaked soil beneath the shed. Though David's body had yet to be found, the overwhelming trail of forensic and circumstantial evidence left little room for doubt. At her arraignment, Emma pleaded not guilty. The courtroom was packed. Tyler Reese, the neighbor who had seen the fire behind the shed, sat near the back staring at the floor. Laura stood with her arms crossed, watching Emma closely as she was led away. The entire town was now divided. Some still clung to the idea that Emma was innocent, tricked or framed. Others, including many of David's students, looked devastated as the truth sank in. The image of their favorite teacher being murdered by his own wife was too much to process. Yet through it all, Emma remained unshaken. Even in handcuffs, she held her head high, like someone who believed she could outmaneuver anything, even the law. But Laura knew better. Emma had been in control for a long time. Now for the first time, she was. The trial of Emma Caldwell became a spectacle that reached far beyond the quiet town of Alder Creek. News vans lined the streets for weeks. Reporters jostled for courtroom seats. Every detail of the case was dissected on television and social media. The seemingly perfect marriage, the shocking murder, the cold cover-up. People watched not just out of curiosity, but out of disbelief. How could a woman so admired, so trusted, be capable of something so brutal, so calculated? Prosecutors laid out the evidence meticulously. They presented the DNA samples found in the backyard, the burn barrel debris, and the blood-soaked earth beneath the shed. They played footage of Emma driving alone late at night, showed receipts for lime and tarp, and even introduced expert testimony on the traces of human bone found among the ashes. Though David's body had never been recovered, the circumstantial evidence was overwhelming. Piece by piece, they built a case of a woman who had plotted her husband's death not in a moment of rage, but with chilling precision. The defense tried to paint a different picture. They argued that Emma was the victim of coincidence and grief, that the prosecution had no direct evidence linking her to a murder. They claimed David might have taken his own life or staged his disappearance. But those arguments couldn't compete with the reality that unfolded through months of investigation. The sealed records of Emma's past were allowed in under special circumstances. Though redacted, the jury learned enough to see a consistent pattern of deceit. The woman in front of them wasn't just a widow, she was a lifelong architect of lies. Emma sat still throughout the proceeding, showing little emotion. She wore the same faint, unreadable smile that had unnerved Detective Laura Briggs from the beginning. She never cried, never shouted, not when her lies were exposed, not when photographs of the blood evidence were shown to the court, not even when the private investigator's report was read aloud in full. If she felt fear, she hid it. If she felt regret, she buried it. After 3 weeks of testimony, The jury deliberated for just 6 hours. The verdict was unanimous, guilty on all counts. First-degree murder, obstruction of justice, and tampering with evidence. As the sentence was read aloud, life in prison without parole, Emma remained impassive. The courtroom, however, was not. David's colleagues wept silently. Former students held each other, stunned. Tyler Reese, the neighbor who had unknowingly witnessed part of the cover-up, sat alone, hands clenched in his lap, his eyes fixed on the floor. Detective Laura Briggs didn't celebrate. She had closed cases like this before, but something about this one lingered in her chest like a weight. It wasn't just the betrayal or the violence, it was the silence, the way Emma had gone about it all. No screaming, no obvious anger, just methodical elimination. A husband vanished, a life buried, a facade maintained until it cracked under the pressure of a single question: where is David? Months passed, the search for David's body continued, but as of yet, no one had found it. Search parties slowed, media interest faded, but the town never fully healed. Every so often, someone would find a flyer still tacked to a forgotten bulletin board. David's kind eyes staring back, a grim reminder of the lie that blanketed the truth for far too long. Emma was transferred to a maximum security facility upstate. She kept to herself, spoke to no one, and declined visitors. Even in prison, she maintained control over her own silence. She never revealed where she had hidden David's body, not to police, not to attorneys, not to anyone. That final truth remained locked away inside her, possibly forever. In the end, the town of Alder Creek learned a hard lesson. Evil doesn't always scream. Sometimes it smiles, bakes muffins, hands out flyers and pretends to grieve, and sometimes it sleeps under your roof for years unnoticed, until it decides you're no longer useful. Then it simply erases you.